Imagine sending your most trusted diplomat to negotiate peace with an alien empire, only to receive them back as a hollow shell of their former self. What would you do when the enemy breaks not just treaties, but the very soul of your representative? When humanity's greatest strength, our capacity for mercy, becomes our greatest vulnerability, how far would we go to protect our own? This is the story of what happens when humans realize that sometimes, the only way to achieve true peace is to show the galaxy exactly why they should fear us in the first place. The transport ship Meridian's Hope descended through the crimson atmosphere of Caliph Prime like a silver needle threading through blood-colored silk. Ambassador Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the viewport, watching alien cities sprawl across the horizon like metallic tumors beneath three purple suns. After 18 months of careful negotiations through subspace communications, this would be humanity's first face-to-face diplomatic meeting with the hegemony of Caliph. Final approach, Ambassador, called Captain Morrison from the bridge. His voice carried the tension that had plagued their entire 3-week journey through hegemony space. Their escort vessels are maintaining formation. No weapons locks detected. Elena adjusted her ceremonial diplomatic sash, the blue and silver threads catching the alien sunlight. At 42, she had negotiated settlements between Earth's colonies, brokered trade agreements with 3 different alien species, and once talked down a rogue AI that had threatened to crash Luna's orbital platforms. But this felt different. The Caliph hegemony controlled over 400 star systems, commanded fleets that could glass entire worlds, and had been expanding aggressively toward human space for the past 5 years. "Remember, Ambassador," her aide Marcus Chen whispered as they prepared for landing. "The Caliph values strength above all else. Show no weakness, but don't be aggressive. They see diplomacy itself as a form of weakness, so we're already starting from a disadvantage." Elena nodded, reviewing the cultural briefings one last time. The Caliph were apex predators from a world where evolution had favored ruthless competition. Their society was built on dominance hierarchies, and they respected only those who could demonstrate superior force. Yet they had agreed to these negotiations, which gave Elena hope that even they could see the futility of an extended war with humanity. The landing was smooth, the Caliph clearly masters of their own technology. As the ship settled onto the crystalline landing pad, Elena could see her reception committee waiting. 12 Caliph warriors in ceremonial armor flanked a central figure whose elaborate headcrest marked him as a high-ranking diplomat. The warriors were impressive, each standing nearly 3 meters tall, their natural exoskeletons enhanced with technological augmentations that gleamed in the alien sunlight. "They're big," Marcus muttered. "Size isn't everything," Elena replied, though privately she had to admit the sight was intimidating. The Caliph had evolved from something resembling a cross between a mantis and a rhinoceros, and even their diplomats looked like they could tear a human apart without breaking a sweat. The airlock cycled, and Elena stepped onto the surface of Caliph Prime. The gravity was heavier than Earth standard, and the air carried scents of ozone and something metallic that made her nose itch. The lead Caliph diplomat approached, his movements fluid despite his bulk. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said in heavily accented standard. "I am War Diplomat Thexball of the Crimson Fleet. The hegemony acknowledges your arrival." Elena bowed in the Caliph style, arms crossed over her chest. "War Diplomat Thexball, I bring greetings from the United Earth Alliance and hope for a peaceful resolution to our current misunderstandings." Thexball's mandibles clicked in what Elena hoped was amusement rather than irritation. Peace. An interesting human concept. We shall see if you can make it sound appealing to the War Council. The journey to the capital city of Veltar took place in a hover transport that moved with surprising smoothness over the alien landscape. Elena found herself staring at vast industrial complexes where automated systems harvested resources from strip-mined hills. Everything here spoke of efficiency and power, but also of a complete disregard for environmental concerns. "Your world seems very productive," she commented diplomatically. "We take what we need," Thexball replied. "As is proper for the strong. Your human worlds, from what our scouts report, waste much space on unnecessary aesthetics." Elena bit back her first response. The Caliph idea of scouting human worlds was what had started this conflict in the first place. Their ships had been detected in a dozen human systems, gathering intelligence and occasionally abducting colonists for study. When human patrols had attempted to intercept these scouts, the Caliph had responded with overwhelming force, destroying 3 human vessels and killing over 200 crew members. "We believe there's room in the galaxy for different approaches to civilization," she said instead. "Perhaps we can find ways our peoples might benefit from trade rather than conflict." "Trade?" Thexval mused. "Yes, we have studied your economic systems. Interesting that humans will exchange resources without conquest. Inefficient, but interesting." The capital city was a marvel of engineering and a testament to Caliph priorities. Towers of dark metal and crystal soared kilometers into the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Everything was built on a massive scale, designed to accommodate the Caliph's large frames and, apparently, to intimidate visitors. Elena couldn't help but feel like an ant walking through a cathedral built by giants. The War Council chambers were located at the top of the central spire. As they ascended in a gravity lift, Elena reviewed her strategy one more time. The Caliph respected strength, but they also valued efficiency. She would need to convince them that peaceful coexistence would be more profitable than conquest, while simultaneously demonstrating that humanity was strong enough to be worth negotiating with rather than simply destroying. "A word of advice, human," Thexval said as they neared the council chambers. "The War Council includes representatives from 7 different fleets, each with their own territories and prey species. They are not unified in their view of humanity. Some see you as a threat to be eliminated. Others see you as resources to be harvested. A few see you as potential allies, though this last group is small." "And which group do you represent?" Elena asked. Thexval's mandibles clicked again. "I represent the hegemony's interests, whatever those may prove to be." The council chamber was even more intimidating than Elena had expected. 7 massive caliphs sat on raised platforms arranged in a circle, each one adorned with the distinctive markings of their respective fleets. Their exoskeletons bore the scars of countless battles, and their weapons, ceremonial but undoubtedly functional, gleamed with deadly promise. At the center of the circle sat a single chair, clearly designed for a much smaller being. "Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Alliance," Thexval announced formally. "She comes seeking terms." Elena walked to the central chair, fighting the urge to look up at the towering figures surrounding her. She had faced hostile crowds before, but never quite like this. Each of these beings could probably tear her apart with their bare claws, and they all looked like they were considering it. "Honored members of the War Council," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I come before you not as a supplicant, but as a representative of a species that has no desire for conflict with the proud Caliph hegemony. We seek understanding, mutual benefit, and an end to the unfortunate incidents that have marred our first contact." Fleet Marshal Gorthek of the Obsidian Fleet leaned forward, his massive frame creaking with mechanical augmentations. "Incidents? You call the destruction of our scout vessels incidents?" Elena had expected this. "I call them the inevitable result of misunderstanding between our peoples. Your ships appeared in our space without permission or explanation. Our patrols responded as they would to any unknown military presence. If we had known they were Caliph vessels, we would have attempted communication first." "Communication," spat Warchief Zeltes of the Void Hunters. "The weak resort to communication when they cannot fight." "With respect, Warchief Zeltes, I would argue that it takes more strength to seek understanding than to simply destroy what you don't comprehend." Elena kept her voice calm, even respectful. "The Caliph are clearly superior to humanity in many ways: your technology, your military might, your expansion across the galaxy. But destruction is easy. Any species with sufficient weapons can destroy. Building something lasting requires true strength." This caused a stir among the council members. Elena could see she had struck a nerve, though she wasn't sure whether it was a good one or a bad one. Admiral Kexmore of the Stellar Reapers spoke for the first time, his voice like grinding metal. "You speak of building. What would humans build with the Caliph?" Elena had prepared for this question, but the success of her entire mission would depend on how well she sold her answer. "Trade routes that benefit both our peoples. Shared technology that makes us all stronger. A partnership that could dominate this entire galactic arm, not through conquest, but through cooperation." Cooperation. Fleet Marshal Gorthak repeated the word like a foreign concept. Explain this cooperation. What can humans offer that the Caliph cannot simply take? This was the crucial moment. Elena reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, a holographic projector that displayed the current galactic map. Blue dots indicated human colonies, red showed confirmed Caliph territory, and yellow marked the dozen other major species in this region of space. Look at the map, she said. The Caliph control 400 systems. Humans control 57. But, between us, we're surrounded by 12 other species, some of which are more advanced than either of our peoples. The Veltar Consortium alone controls 800 systems. The Arxian Empire has over 1,000. If they decided to expand in our direction. She left the implication hanging. Admiral Kexmore's optical sensors focused on the display with obvious interest. You suggest an alliance against superior forces? I suggest that two strong peoples working together are stronger than either alone. The Caliph have military superiority. Humans have certain other advantages. Elena highlighted several regions on the map. Human traders have established relationships with 6 of these species. Our diplomats have negotiated successful treaties with 4 others. Our explorers have mapped trade routes through territories that others consider too dangerous to enter. Warchief Zeltes scoffed. Humans run where Caliph would fight. Humans go where Caliph cannot, Elena corrected gently. There are regions of space that cannot be conquered by force alone. The meditation worlds of the ZXNI, for example. Their entire civilization is based on passive resistance. They would rather die than fight, but they possess gravitational manipulation technology that could reshape entire star systems. The Caliph could destroy them, but you could never force them to share their knowledge. And humans could? Elena smiled. 3 years ago, human negotiators convinced the ZXNI to share their agricultural techniques in exchange for protection from the Scolari raiders. The harvest yields on 16 human agricultural worlds have increased by 40% as a result. The council chamber fell silent except for the subtle humming of Caliph technology. Elena could see she had given them something to think about. The Caliph were predators, but they were also intelligent predators. If she could convince them that cooperation would serve their interests better than conquest. Fleet Marshal Valaraci of the Iron Talon spoke next, his voice thoughtful. Assuming humans could facilitate such negotiations, what would the Caliph gain from this arrangement? Access to technologies and resources that conquest alone cannot provide. Safe passage through regions where Caliph ships would be attacked on sight. Most importantly, a partner that can complement your strengths rather than simply duplicate them. Elena paused, then played her strongest card. The Veltar Consortium has been expanding toward human space for the past 2 years. Our intelligence suggests they view both human and Caliph territory as potential targets for their next expansion wave. Separately, neither of our peoples could withstand their full assault. Together we could crush them, Warchief Zeltes said with obvious relish. Together we could make them an offer they couldn't refuse, Elena corrected. The consortium values economic efficiency above all else. If we could demonstrate that peaceful coexistence is more profitable than conquest. Admiral Kexmore's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense thought, according to Elena's briefings. This is all theoretical. How do we know humans can deliver on these promises? Elena had been waiting for this question. Because we're already doing it. Human diplomatic missions are active in 18 systems that have never hosted Caliph representatives. Our trade agreements have prevented 3 wars in the past 5 years. Our exploration data has opened safe passage routes through regions the Caliph consider impassable. She gestured to the holographic display again. I have authorization to share detailed maps of 6 previously unknown systems, complete resource surveys of 12 worlds suitable for Caliph colonization, and preliminary contact protocols for 3 species that have expressed interest in meeting Caliph representatives under human auspices. The silence that followed was different from before, more calculating, less hostile. Elena could see the council members weighing costs and benefits with the same ruthless efficiency they apply to military campaigns. Finally, Warchief Zeltes spoke. And What would humans require in return for these gifts? A cessation of military activities in human space. Formal recognition of existing human territorial claims. And a joint commission to establish protocols for future cooperation. That's all? Elena nodded. We're not asking for Caliph technology or territory. We're not demanding reparations for the crews you killed. We're simply asking for the chance to prove that cooperation is more profitable than conflict. Fleet Marshal Gorthak leaned back in his seat, the metal creaking under his weight. You paint an appealing picture, human. But words are cheap. How do we know your species has the strength to honor such agreements? This was the question Elena had hoped to avoid, but she had prepared for it nonetheless. The Caliph respected strength above all else, and they would need to see evidence of human capability before they would take any agreements seriously. Because we're not here as suppliants, she said firmly. The United Earth Alliance has mobilized the Third Fleet to patrol our borders during these negotiations. 16 dreadnoughts, 47 heavy cruisers, and over 200 support vessels. We're not asking for peace because we fear war. We're asking for peace because we believe it serves both our interests. This was partly bluff. The Third Fleet was impressive by human standards, but the Caliph could probably destroy it with a single task force. But Elena was betting that the Council would see the political implications rather than just the military ones. A species confident enough to deploy their fleet during peace negotiations was a species that might have other surprises in store. Additionally, she continued, human defense platforms now protect 17 systems. Our shield technology has proven effective against Caliph plasma weapons, as your scouts have undoubtedly reported. We may not be able to defeat the hegemony in open war, but we can make any victory extremely costly. The council members exchanged glances that Elena couldn't interpret. Finally, Admiral Kexmore spoke. The War Council will consider your proposals. You will remain on Caliph Prime as our guest while we deliberate. Elena bowed formally. I am honored by your hospitality. As she was escorted from the chamber, Elena felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The negotiations had gone better than she had dared expect, but she knew the real work was just beginning. The Caliph would need time to verify her claims, consult with their various fleet commanders, and decide whether the benefits of cooperation outweighed their natural predatory instincts. Her quarters in the diplomatic compound were luxurious by any standard, a suite of rooms with windows overlooking the city and furnishings designed to accommodate a human's smaller frame. Marcus was waiting for her with a full debrief report. How did it go? He asked as soon as the door sealed behind them. Better than I feared, not as well as I hoped, Elena replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. They're interested, but they're also suspicious. The Caliph don't trust easily, and they're going to want proof of everything I promised. Can we deliver? Elena considered this carefully. Most of it, yes. The exploration data is real. The diplomatic contacts are genuine. The Third Fleet, well, it exists, even if it's not quite as intimidating as I made it sound. And if they call our bluff? Then, we find out whether humans are as good at improvising as we think we are. Over the following days, Elena found herself in a strange routine. Each morning brought meetings with various Caliph officials, military commanders, resource managers, territorial administrators. Each wanted to understand different aspects of her proposals, to probe for weaknesses or opportunities. The Caliph were thorough in their analysis, approaching diplomacy with the same methodical intensity they brought to warfare. The most challenging meeting came on her fourth day, when War Chief Zeltes requested a private audience. Elena found him in a training facility deep within the diplomatic compound, sparring with combat drones that moved with lethal precision. Even by Caliph standards, he was impressive, nearly 4 meters tall, with augmentations that gleamed like weapons in the dim lighting. Ah, the human diplomat, he said without stopping his exercises. Tell me, do all humans fight as poorly as your patrol crews? Elena watched him destroy 3 drones in rapid succession, his movements a blur of calculated violence. Our patrol crews weren't expecting to fight Caliph vessels. If they had been prepared, they would have died slightly more quickly. Zeltes finally stopped, turning to face her directly. Humans are weak, Ambassador. Physically weak, technologically inferior, numerically insignificant. Why should the hegemony waste time with negotiations when conquest would be so much simpler? Elena had encountered this attitude before, but never quite so bluntly stated. Because conquest isn't about simplicity, Warchief. It's about results. You could conquer human space, yes. But what would you gain? 57 systems, most of them marginal colonies with limited resources. In the time it would take to organize that conquest, the Veltar Consortium could claim 3 times as much territory in other directions. And cooperation would prevent this how? Because cooperation multiplies strength rather than simply adding it. Elena gestured toward the training room's walls, which were lined with weapons from dozens of different species. I see you collect trophies from your conquests. Each of those weapons represents a different approach to warfare, a different solution to tactical problems. But they're just trophies now, curiosities rather than tools. Your point? Human diplomatic relationships are not trophies. They're living, growing networks of mutual benefit. The ZXNI don't just sell us agricultural techniques, they share their ongoing research. The Melkari don't just trade with us, they coordinate their exploration efforts with ours. The Caliph could have access to all of that, but only through cooperation. Warchief Zeltes selected a massive blade from the weapon display, testing its balance with practiced ease. And if the Caliph decide that cooperation is not in our nature? Elena met his gaze steadily. Then, the galaxy loses the opportunity to see what the strongest military force and the most adaptable diplomatic corps could accomplish together. The warchief studied her for a long moment, then, suddenly, moved. Elena tensed, but he simply returned the blade to its place on the wall. You are braver than you appear, human. Or perhaps more foolish. The War Council will render their decision soon. As Elena walked back to her quarters, she reflected on the conversation. Warchief Zeltes was clearly the most aggressive member of the council, but even he seemed to be seriously considering her proposals. If she could win over the hardliners, the moderate voices would follow. That evening, as she reviewed her notes and prepared for what she hoped would be the final round of negotiations, Elena received an unexpected visitor. Thexfall arrived at her quarters with an escort of 2 guards, his expression unreadable. War diplomat Thexfall, she greeted him formally. How may I assist you? Walk with me, Ambassador. There are things you should know before tomorrow's final session. They walked through the compound's gardens, an impressive display of Caliph horticulture that favored sharp, angular plants in shades of red and black. The alien flowers released spores that glowed faintly in the dim light, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. The War Council is divided, Thexfall said without preamble. 3 members favor your proposals. 2 are undecided. 2 oppose any agreement. Elena felt her heart sink. And the deciding vote? Warchief Zeltes holds the most influence with the undecided members. His recommendation will likely determine the outcome. And his current position? Thexfall's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Unknown. He respects strength above all else, but he has been unusually thoughtful since your arrival. This could be encouraging or dangerous. They paused beside a fountain that shot streams of luminous liquid in complex patterns. Elena watched the display while she considered this information. Is there anything else I should know? Only this: the Caliph do not negotiate from weakness. If the War Council approves your proposals, it will be because they believe cooperation serves Caliph interests, not human ones. Do not mistake pragmatic alliance for friendship. Elena nodded. I understand. The question is whether pragmatic alliance is enough to build something lasting. That, Thexfall said, remains to be seen. As they walked back toward her quarters, Elena felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Tomorrow's session would determine not just the fate of human-Caliph relations, but potentially the balance of power in this entire region of space. If she succeeded, she could prevent a war that would cost millions of lives. If she failed, she pushed that thought aside. Failure was not an option. Humanity had sent her here for a reason, and she would not let them down. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same determination that had carried human explorers to the stars in the first place. The night passed slowly, filled with dreams of vast starships and alien voices speaking in languages she could not understand. But, when morning came, Elena Vasquez was ready to make her final plea for peace. The final session of the War Council convened at dawn, when the three sons of Caliph Prime cast the council chamber in hues of deep crimson and burning gold. Elena entered to find the 7 members already in position, their imposing forms silhouetted against the vast windows that overlooked the capital city. The atmosphere felt different from her previous appearances, heavier, more charged with anticipation. War diplomat Thexball escorted her to the central chair, but this time he remained standing beside her, a gesture that Elena hoped indicated some level of support. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle humming of alien technology and the distant sound of aircraft moving through the morning sky. Fleet Marshal Gorthak spoke first, his augmented voice carrying formal weight. Ambassador Vasquez, the War Council has deliberated on your proposals. We have verified your claims regarding human diplomatic achievements and territorial dispositions. We have also consulted with our fleet commanders regarding the military implications of either alliance or conquest. Elena kept her expression neutral, though her heart was racing. The formal tone could indicate either acceptance or rejection. The Caliph seemed to take ceremony seriously regardless of the outcome. Additionally, Admiral Kexmore continued, we have received new intelligence regarding Veltar Consortium movements in sectors adjacent to both human and Caliph space. This information has influenced our final deliberations. Elena wondered what this new intelligence might contain, but she knew better than to ask directly. The Caliph would reveal what they chose to reveal in their own time. War Chief Zeltes leaned forward, his massive frame creaking with mechanical augmentations. Before we render our decision, the War Council has questions that require immediate answers. First, what assurance can you provide that human diplomatic efforts will actually benefit Caliph interests rather than simply serving as a shield for human weakness? Elena had anticipated this question, but the directness of it still stung. War Chief Zeltes, I offer the assurance of mutual self-interest. Human diplomatic networks exist because they serve human purposes, but those purposes often align with broader galactic stability. For example, our treaties with the meditation worlds of the ZXNI prevent Scolari raids throughout this entire region. Caliph colonies would benefit from that stability just as human colonies do. Specific examples, demanded Fleet Marshal Valaresi. What immediate benefits would the Caliph gain from alliance with humanity? Elena activated her holographic projector, displaying the regional map with several new highlights. 3 concrete benefits within the first standard year. First, access to the Meridian trade route, which cuts travel time between the Outer Rim territories and the galactic core by 30%. Human treaties with the Route Guardians currently restrict access to UEA vessels, but those agreements could be extended to include Caliph ships. She highlighted a series of star systems along the route. Second, shared intelligence regarding Arxian Empire expansion patterns. Human scouts have mapped 17 forward observation posts that suggest the Arxians are preparing for a major territorial push within the next 2 years. Caliph military commanders would benefit from this information. The council members exchanged glances that Elena was learning to interpret as intense interest. The Arxian Empire was one of the few galactic powers that could challenge the Caliph militarily, and early warning of their expansion plans would be invaluable. Third, Elena continued, joint colonization opportunities in the Omega Nebula. Human surveys have identified 43 worlds suitable for development, but we lack the industrial capacity to establish colonies on more than 12 of them. Caliph engineering capabilities could develop the remaining systems in exchange for territorial rights and resource-sharing agreements. Admiral Kexmore's optical sensors focused on the nebula region with obvious interest. These surveys, how detailed are they? Complete geological and atmospheric analysis, resource mapping, indigenous life assessments, and preliminary infrastructure recommendations. Elena highlighted several specific worlds. I'm authorized to share full survey data for 15 systems as a gesture of good faith. And the other 28? Elena smiled slightly. Would be available to joint human Caliph survey teams under the proposed cooperation agreements. War Chief Zeltes's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Caliph equivalent of appreciative laughter. Cleverly done, human. You dangled the prize while keeping most of it just out of reach. I prefer to think of it as demonstrating value while maintaining negotiating position, Elena replied. The Caliph appreciates strategic thinking, do they not? This earned her what she was beginning to recognize as approving gestures from several council members. The Caliph did indeed respect strategic thinking, even when it was directed against their own interests. Fleet Marshal Gorthak spoke again, his tone more serious. Second question, what guarantee can humans provide that these cooperation agreements will not be used to gather intelligence on Caliph military capabilities or territorial vulnerabilities? This was a more dangerous question, touching on the fundamental trust issues that would plague any human-Caliph alliance. Elena chose her words carefully. Fleet Marshal, I cannot provide guarantees against human intelligence gathering, just as you cannot provide guarantees against Caliph intelligence gathering. What I can offer is transparency and mutual benefit. Joint operations would necessarily involve shared intelligence protocols, which would make secret intelligence gathering both more difficult and more counterproductive. She paused, then decided to take a calculated risk. Furthermore, I'm authorized to propose the establishment of joint intelligence sharing protocols specifically focused on external threats. Human diplomatic intelligence combined with Caliph military intelligence would create a comprehensive threat assessment capability that would serve both our peoples. External threats only? Admiral Kexmore inquired. External threats only, Elena confirmed. Neither species would benefit from destabilizing an alliance through internal espionage. War diplomat Thexball spoke for the first time during this session. And if either species violates these protocols? Elena had hoped to avoid this topic, but she realized it was crucial to address directly. Then, the offended party would have the right to withdraw from specific cooperation agreements while maintaining the overall alliance framework. Graduated response rather than total termination. Meaning? Meaning that if human intelligence operatives were discovered gathering unauthorized information on Caliph military installations, the Caliph could suspend joint military operations while maintaining trade and diplomatic cooperation. The goal would be to preserve the beneficial aspects of alliance while addressing specific violations. The council chamber fell silent as the members considered this. Elena could see that she was walking a tightrope between demonstrating human trustworthiness and acknowledging the realities of interspecies relations. Fleet Marshal Valaraci spoke next, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. Third question, what evidence can you provide that human military capabilities are sufficient to make alliance worthwhile rather than conquest preferable? This was the question Elena had been dreading. The Caliph could certainly conquer human space if they devoted sufficient resources to the effort, and everyone in the chamber knew it. She would have to convince them that conquest would be more costly than they anticipated, without appearing to threaten them directly. Fleet Marshal, I won't insult your intelligence by claiming that human military forces could defeat the Caliph in direct conflict. However, conquest involves more than simply destroying enemy fleets. Elena modified her holographic display to show human defensive positions. Human space is defended by a network of automated defense platforms, shielded installations, and mobile fleets operating under unified command. She highlighted several key systems. More importantly, human colonies are designed for rapid evacuation and resource denial. In the event of invasion, civilian populations could be evacuated to prepared fallback positions while automated systems destroyed or rendered useless all strategic resources. Warchief Zeltes leaned back in his seat. Scorched earth tactics. Honorable, but ultimately futile against a sufficiently determined enemy. Perhaps, Elena acknowledged. But, consider the cost-benefit analysis from the Caliph perspective. Conquering human space would require significant fleet deployments for an extended period. During that time, the Veltar Consortium, the Arxian Empire, or other powers could exploit Caliph territorial vulnerabilities elsewhere. She changed the display to show galactic force dispositions. Furthermore, the resources gained from conquering human space would be minimal compared to what the Caliph could gain through joint operations in underdeveloped regions. Why fight for 57 marginal systems when cooperation could open access to hundreds of rich, undeveloped worlds? Admiral Kexmore's optical sensors focused intently on the display. Assuming the cooperation actually functions as proposed. Alliance is more complex than conquest, more opportunities for failure, more potential for misunderstanding. True, Elena admitted. But also more opportunities for mutual benefit and growth. The Caliph have built an impressive empire through military expansion, but even empires reach limits. Alliance offers a path to continued growth without the escalating costs of perpetual warfare. The council members exchanged more of those unreadable glances. Elena was beginning to sense that the decision had already been made, and this final session was more about establishing the framework for whatever that decision entailed. War diplomat Thexball stepped forward slightly. Final question: what authority does Ambassador Vasquez possess to negotiate specific terms of cooperation, and what ratification process would any agreements require? Elena felt a moment of relief. This was a procedural question, suggesting that the council was indeed considering approval. I have full authority to negotiate framework agreements and preliminary terms. Specific operational details would require ratification by the UEA Council and approval by your War Council, but I can commit humanity to general principles of cooperation. And the timeline for such ratification? The UEA Council is prepared to convene within 2 weeks of my return to human space. Given the strategic importance of these negotiations, I anticipate full ratification within 1 standard month, assuming the terms are acceptable to human interests. Fleet Marshal Gorthak rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the chamber. The War Council will now render its decision regarding the human proposals. The formal tone sent chills down Elena's spine. This was the moment that would determine the fate of 2 species and, potentially, the balance of power in this entire region of space. After extensive deliberation and analysis, Fleet Marshal Gorthak continued, the War Council of the Caliph Hegemony has reached a unanimous decision. Unanimous. Elena felt her heart skip. That could be very good or very bad, depending on which way unanimity had fallen. The War Council finds that cooperation with the United Earth Alliance serves the strategic interests of the Caliph Hegemony, subject to specific terms and conditions to be negotiated. Elena felt a wave of relief so intense that she had to grip the arms of her chair to keep from visibly sagging. They had agreed. Against all odds, the most aggressive military power in known space had agreed to work with humanity rather than simply crushing them. However, Admiral Kexmore continued, and Elena's relief immediately transformed back into apprehension. The War Council recognizes that alliance between our peoples will require extensive cultural and operational adjustments. Therefore, we propose a graduated implementation process. Warchief Zaltes took over the explanation. Phase 1, immediate cessation of military activities in human space and establishment of joint diplomatic protocols. This phase will last 1 standard year and will serve as a test of both species' commitment to cooperation. Elena nodded, though she was already wondering what the later phases would entail. Phase 2, limited joint operations in neutral territories, including shared exploration of the Omega Nebula and coordination against external threats. This phase will last 2 standard years and will test operational compatibility. Phase 3, Fleet Marshal Valaraci continued, full strategic alliance including shared intelligence, coordinated military operations, and integrated territorial defense. Implementation of Phase 3 will depend on successful completion of the earlier phases. Elena found herself impressed despite her relief. The Caliph had structured the agreement to minimize their risks while maximizing opportunities to evaluate human reliability. It was exactly the sort of careful, strategic approach she would have expected from a people who had built an empire through methodical expansion. These terms are acceptable to the United Earth Alliance, Elena said formally. I'm authorized to commit humanity to this graduated implementation process. War diplomat Thexball stepped forward with what Elena was learning to recognize as a formal document reader, a crystalline device that projected 3-dimensional text in both Caliph and Standard. The preliminary treaty framework, incorporating the terms discussed. Elena activated her own recorder, reviewing the terms as they appeared. The agreement was more generous than she had dared hope, but also more complex than she had anticipated. The Caliph had included detailed protocols for everything from joint survey operations to conflict resolution procedures. One additional provision, Fleet Marshal Gorthak said as Elena finished her review. Ambassador Vasquez will remain on Caliph Prime for the duration of Phase 1 implementation, serving as the primary human representative to the hegemony. Elena blinked in surprise. She had expected to return to human space immediately to begin the ratification process. I'm honored by your confidence, but the UEA Council will need my testimony regarding these negotiations. The War Council understands this requirement, Admiral Kexmore replied. You will return to human space aboard a Caliph vessel to present these terms to your government. However, your presence here will be required to oversee the early stages of implementation. Elena realized that this was actually quite reasonable. The early phases of any alliance would be the most vulnerable to misunderstanding and miscommunication. Having her on site to resolve issues quickly could prevent minor problems from escalating into major crises. I accept this responsibility, she said formally. War Chief Seltes rose from his seat, the sound of his mechanical augmentations echoing through the chamber. Then, let the record show that on this date, the Caliph hegemony and the United Earth Alliance have agreed to pursue cooperative rather than competitive relationships. The other council members rose as well, creating an impressive display of unified authority. Elena stood and bowed in the Caliph style, her diplomatic training taking over despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. The War Council declares this session concluded, Fleet Marshal Gorthak announced. Implementation procedures will begin immediately. As the council members began to disperse, War Diplomat Fexball approached Elena's position. Congratulations, Ambassador. You have achieved something remarkable. Elena felt a mixture of elation and exhaustion. Thank you. Though I suspect the real work is just beginning. Indeed. The Caliph do not make such commitments lightly, but neither do they tolerate failure easily. The success of this alliance will depend on both species' ability to adapt to cooperation rather than competition. Elena nodded, already thinking about the challenges ahead. When do I depart for human space? Tomorrow. Fleet Marshal Valaraci has assigned one of his fastest ships to escort you to the border. The journey will take approximately 18 days. And my aide? Will accompany you, of course. The Caliph honored diplomatic protocol, even when it serves our own interests. As Elena walked back to her quarters, she felt the full impact of what had just occurred beginning to settle in. She had come to Caliph Prime expecting to attempt negotiations that would probably fail. Instead, she had secured the foundation for an alliance that could reshape the balance of power in this entire region of space. But Fexball was right, the real work was just beginning. Convincing two proud, competitive species to actually cooperate would require careful management, constant communication, and probably a few minor miracles along the way. Marcus was waiting in her quarters with a broad smile and a bottle of what he claimed was champagne but was probably some form of reconstituted alcohol substitute. I heard the news. Congratulations, Madam Ambassador. Elena accepted the drink gratefully. Thank you. Though I have to admit, I'm almost more nervous about the implementation than I was about the negotiations. Why? Elena considered the question while she reviewed the formal treaty document. Because negotiating is about finding common ground between different positions. Implementation is about actually operating on that common ground day after day. The Caliph agreed to work with us, but that doesn't mean they understand us any better than they did yesterday. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And vice versa. We're going to be learning to work with a species that considers warfare a normal diplomatic tool. Exactly. The potential for misunderstanding is enormous, and the consequences of failure. Elena trailed off, not wanting to voice her fears. Our war, Marcus finished quietly. Elena raised her glass in a mock toast. To the most challenging diplomatic assignment in human history. To the most successful negotiation in human history, Marcus countered. They drank, and Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could take pride in having achieved something that most experts had considered impossible. The Caliph hegemony and the United Earth Alliance were going to attempt cooperation instead of conquest. The rest of the evening was spent in detailed planning. Elena would need to present the alliance framework to the UEA Council in terms that emphasized human interests while downplaying Caliph dominance. She would need to establish communication protocols that could function across the cultural gap between human diplomacy and Caliph military hierarchy. Most importantly, she would need to identify potential trouble spots where misunderstanding could undermine the entire agreement. As she prepared for sleep, Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they had accomplished. If the Human-Caliph alliance succeeded, it could serve as a model for cooperation between other species in this region. The Veltar Consortium, the Arxian Empire, even the smaller powers might begin to see alliance as preferable to conquest. But, if it failed, the consequences would extend far beyond human space. A failed alliance would likely lead to a devastating war, and other species would learn that cooperation was impossible with predator races like the Caliph. Elena fell asleep to the sound of alien aircraft moving through the night sky above Caliph Prime, carrying dreams of vast starships bearing both human and Caliph markings, working together to explore the unknown regions of space that stretched endlessly beyond the borders of known civilization. The next morning brought a flurry of departure preparations. Elena's belongings were packed, diplomatic pouches were secured, and Marcus ran final checks on their communication equipment. The Caliph had provided them with secure transmitters that would allow real-time communication with human space during their journey, a gesture of good faith that Elena appreciated. War diplomat Thexball arrived to escort them to the spaceport, accompanied by an honor guard that Elena was learning to interpret as a sign of respect rather than threat. The Caliph's ship assigned to transport them was a sleek vessel that combined military efficiency with diplomatic comfort, another indication that the hegemony was taking this alliance seriously. "Safe travels, Ambassador," Thexval said as they reached the boarding ramp. "The War Council looks forward to your prompt return." Elena shook his hand in the human style, then bowed in the Caliph fashion. "I look forward to beginning the real work of building this alliance." As the ship lifted off from Caliph Prime, Elena watched the alien cityscape fall away beneath them. She was leaving with more than she had dared hope for, but also with the weight of enormous responsibility. The next few months would determine whether two radically different species could actually work together, or whether this promising beginning would collapse into the warfare that everyone had expected from the start. The journey to human space would give her time to prepare her presentation to the UEA Council, but it would also give her time to worry about all the things that could go wrong. Elena settled into her cabin, activated her recording equipment, and began drafting the most important diplomatic report of her career. Outside the viewport, alien stars wheeled past in patterns that human eyes had never seen before, carrying two species toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The Caliph escort vessel Crimson Talon emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory exactly 18 days after departing Caliph Prime. Elena stood at the bridge viewport, watching the familiar constellations of Earth's local group resolve into clarity against the starfield. After weeks among alien suns and crimson skies, the sight of Sol's yellow light in the distance filled her with an unexpected surge of emotion. "Contact from UEA Border Command," announced the ship's communications officer, his standard heavily accented but clear. "They request immediate identification and confirmation of diplomatic status." Captain Vorthake, the Caliph naval officer assigned to escort Elena home, gestured toward the communication station with what Elena had learned was amusement. "Your people seem nervous about our arrival, Ambassador." Elena smiled as she moved to the transmitter. "Captain, if a heavily armed alien warship appeared at Earth's borders without warning, the Caliph would probably be nervous too." "The Caliph would be shooting," Vorthake replied matter-of-factly. "Your people merely ask questions." "Interesting approach." Elena activated the transmitter, broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies. "UEA Border Command, this is Ambassador Elena Vasquez returning aboard the Caliph vessel Crimson Talon. I'm carrying priority diplomatic materials and request immediate escort to Earth." The response came quickly, though she could hear the tension in the controller's voice. "Ambassador Vasquez, please confirm your identity with security codes and provide status report on your mission." Elena provided the required codes, then added, "Mission successful. I'm returning with signed preliminary agreements for alliance between the UEA and the Caliph hegemony. I need immediate transport to UEA headquarters and a priority session with the full council." A longer pause followed, and Elena could imagine the frantic activity her announcement was probably causing at Border Command. A successful negotiation with the Caliph was something most human officials had considered impossible. Ambassador, you're cleared for approach to Transfer Station Alpha. UEA vessels are moving to escort position. Please maintain current course and speed. Elena turned to Captain Vorthe K. Captain, I want to thank you and your crew for your courtesy during this journey. Your professionalism has been an excellent start to human-Caliph cooperation. The Caliph captain's mandibles clicked in. What Elena had learned was pleasure. Your species shows more potential than many we have encountered, Ambassador. Perhaps this alliance will prove beneficial to both our peoples. The transfer to human vessels was accomplished smoothly, though Elena noted the tension among the human crews as they worked in close proximity to the Caliph's ship. The cultural adjustment would need to work both ways. Humans would have to overcome their fear of the formidable aliens, just as the Caliph would need to accept working with beings they considered physically inferior. Elena's first stop was the UEA Intelligence Directorate, where she spent 6 hours in comprehensive debriefing sessions. Director Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus despite the surname, led the questioning with the methodical thoroughness Elena expected from someone responsible for humanity's security. Let me understand this correctly, Director Chen said as she reviewed Elena's preliminary report. The Caliph War Council unanimously agreed to alliance rather than conquest? They agreed to a graduated cooperation framework that could evolve into full alliance, Elena clarified. They're being cautious, which is understandable given the cultural differences involved. And, they specifically requested that you return to oversee implementation? Elena nodded. I think they want to ensure consistent interpretation of the agreements. The early phases will be vulnerable to misunderstanding, and having a familiar negotiator on site could prevent minor issues from escalating. Director Chen activated a holographic display showing current intelligence assessments of Caliph capabilities. Our analysts estimate that the hegemony could conquer human space within 6 months if they devoted sufficient resources to the effort. Why do you believe they chose alliance instead? Elena had anticipated this question during her journey home. Several factors. First, the cost-benefit analysis favors cooperation over conquest. Second, external threats from the Veltar Consortium and Arxian Empire make it strategically valuable for the Caliph to have allies rather than simply more territory to defend. Third, human diplomatic capabilities offer access to resources and relationships that conquest alone couldn't provide. And, fourth? Elena paused, considering how to phrase her next observation. Fourth, I believe the Caliph are curious about cooperation as a strategic approach. They've built their empire through conquest, but even they can see the limitations of that methodology. Alliance offers them a chance to experiment with a different path forward. Director Chen made notes on her personal display. What's your assessment of the risks involved in this alliance? Significant but manageable, Elena replied honestly. The primary risk is cultural misunderstanding leading to escalation. The Caliph interpret many human diplomatic behaviors as signs of weakness, while humans may see Caliph directness as aggression. Careful management will be essential. And, if the alliance fails? Elena met the director's gaze steadily. If it fails, we'll be at war with the most powerful military force in this region of space, and they'll have detailed knowledge of human capabilities and territorial dispositions. Failure is not an option. The debriefing concluded with Elena providing detailed technical data about Caliph technology, territorial organization, and military capabilities. The intelligence would be valuable regardless of how the alliance developed, but Elena hoped it would serve to enhance cooperation rather than prepare for war. Her next appointment was with President Martinez, who had called an emergency session of the full UEA Council to review the alliance proposals. Elena found herself standing before the assembled representatives of 57 human worlds, each carrying the hopes and fears of their constituents. Ambassador Vasquez, President Martinez began formally, please present your report on the Caliph negotiations. Elena activated the chamber's central holographic display, showing the preliminary treaty framework in 3 dimensions. Madam President, esteemed council members, I'm pleased to report that the Caliph War Council has agreed to pursue cooperative rather than competitive relationships with the United Earth Alliance. The murmur that ran through the chamber was a mixture of surprise, relief, and skepticism. Council member Harrison from New Geneva was the first to speak. Ambassador, this agreement seems almost too good to be true. What concessions did you have to make to secure Caliph cooperation? Elena had prepared for this question as well. Counselor Harrison, the primary concessions were actually commitments to do things that serve human interests anyway, sharing selected diplomatic intelligence, coordinating exploration efforts in neutral territories, and establishing protocols for joint operations against external threats. Meaning? Meaning the Caliph don't want tribute or territory. They want partnership and activities that will strengthen both our species against common challenges. Council member Rodriguez from Mars Colony raised her hand. What about the graduated implementation timeline? Why not immediate full alliance? Because both species need time to adjust to cooperation rather than competition, Elena explained. The Caliph are predators by nature, they're used to taking what they want by force. Humans are collaborative by nature, we're used to building consensus and finding common ground. Those different approaches need to be harmonized gradually. President Martinez leaned forward. Ambassador, in your professional opinion, is this alliance genuinely in humanity's best interests? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. Madam President, I believe this alliance is essential for humanity's long-term survival. The galactic political situation is becoming increasingly unstable. The Veltar Consortium is expanding aggressively. The Arxian Empire is mobilizing for major territorial acquisitions. Smaller powers are forming defensive coalitions. She modified the holographic display to show current galactic force dispositions. Alone, humanity lacks the military power to defend ourselves against any major threat. In alliance with the Caliph, we become part of a coalition that no other power would dare challenge. Council member Park from Titan Station spoke next. What about the cultural risks? The Caliph are fundamentally different from us, violent, hierarchical, authoritarian. Won't prolonged association with them change human civilization for the worse? Elena had wrestled with this question throughout her journey home. Counselor Park, I won't pretend that working with the Caliph will be easy or without risks. But, consider the alternative. If we reject this alliance, we face the choice between conquest by the Caliph or conquest by some other power. At least in alliance, we maintain our autonomy and have the opportunity to influence how the relationship develops. And, you believe human influence will be meaningful in such an alliance? I believe human diplomatic capabilities are precisely what make us valuable to the Caliph. They didn't agree to this alliance because they fear us militarily, they agreed because they recognize that cooperation can achieve things that conquest cannot. The debate continued for 3 hours, with Elena fielding questions about everything from trade protocols to military integration procedures. Finally, President Martinez called for a preliminary vote on whether to proceed with treaty ratification. The result was decisive, 43 votes in favor, 12 opposed, 2 abstaining. Elena felt a wave of relief as the president announced that the UEA would formally accept the Caliph alliance proposal, subject to final review of detailed implementation protocols. Ambassador Vasquez, President Martinez said as the session concluded, "You've accomplished something extraordinary. The Council authorizes you to return to Caliph Prime with our formal acceptance of their proposals." Elena bowed formally. "Thank you, Madam President. I'll do everything in my power to ensure this alliance succeeds." As Elena prepared for her return journey to Caliph Prime, she met privately with Marcus to discuss the challenges ahead. They sat in her apartment overlooking Geneva Harbor, watching civilian transports move across the lake while military patrols maintained discreet but visible security. "So we're really doing this," Marcus said, reviewing the ratified treaty documents. "Humanity is allying with the most dangerous predator species in known space." Elena nodded, though she could see his underlying concerns. "Marcus, I know you have reservations about this alliance." "Not about the alliance itself," he clarified. "I understand the strategic necessity. I'm worried about the implementation. The Caliph see diplomacy as a sign of weakness. What happens when they decide we're not worth cooperating with anymore?" Elena had been asking herself the same question. "Then, we make sure they never reach that conclusion. We demonstrate human value at every opportunity. We prove that cooperation is more profitable than conquest. And, if we fail?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "If we fail, humanity becomes extinct. Not just conquered, extinct. The Caliph don't usually leave potential threats alive when they're finished with them. Marcus absorbed this soberly. No pressure then. None at all, Elena agreed with dark humor. Just the fate of the species resting on our shoulders. They spent the evening planning for Elena's extended stay on Caliph Prime. She would need to establish a permanent human embassy, staffed with specialists who could work effectively with Caliph officials, and create communication protocols that could prevent misunderstandings from escalating into crises. Most importantly, she would need to identify ways for humanity to demonstrate value to the Caliph on a regular basis. The alliance would only survive as long as both species saw clear benefits from cooperation. The return journey to Caliph Prime took 3 weeks aboard a human diplomatic vessel escorted by 2 UEA cruisers. Elena used the time to establish preliminary contact with Caliph officials, coordinating the establishment of formal diplomatic protocols and beginning the complex process of cultural integration. The Caliph's response to news of UEA ratification was positive but characteristically practical. War diplomat Thexball transmitted detailed schedules for Phase 1 implementation, including joint survey missions in the Omega Nebula and coordination protocols for intelligence sharing regarding external threats. Elena found herself impressed by the efficiency of Caliph planning. Within days of receiving confirmation of the alliance, they had organized specific missions that would test human-Caliph cooperation under controlled conditions. The first joint survey mission would launch within 2 standard months, giving both species time to adapt their procedures for cooperative operations. As the human ships approached Caliph Prime, Elena stood once again at a viewport watching the alien world grow larger against the starfield. But, this time, the sight filled her with anticipation rather than apprehension. She was returning not as a supplicant hoping for peace, but as an ally beginning the complex work of building something unprecedented in galactic history. The landing protocols were different this time as well. Instead of the formal reception she had received as a visiting diplomat, Elena was greeted by war diplomat Thexball and a small staff of Caliph officials who would be working directly with the human embassy. The atmosphere was businesslike rather than ceremonial, a sign that the Caliph were ready to move from negotiation to implementation. "Welcome back, Ambassador," Thexball said as Elena descended from her transport. "The War Council is eager to begin substantive cooperation." Elena smiled, feeling genuinely pleased to see the Caliph diplomat again. "Thank you, War Diplomat. I'm eager to begin as well. The UEA Council has authorized me to establish permanent diplomatic presence here and begin immediate implementation of Phase 1 protocols." "Excellent. We have prepared facilities for your embassy staff and established communication links with human space. The first joint survey mission is scheduled to depart in 6 weeks." As they walked toward the embassy complex, Elena marveled at how much had changed in just a few weeks. The last time she had walked these paths, she had been hoping to prevent a war. Now she was helping to build an alliance that could reshape the balance of power in this entire region of space. The human embassy was located in a complex adjacent to the diplomatic quarter, with living accommodations designed for human physiology and communication equipment that could maintain real-time contact with UEA headquarters. Elena was impressed by the attention to detail. The Caliph had clearly put significant effort into ensuring that their human allies would be comfortable during their extended stay. Her first formal meeting with the War Council in her new role as permanent human representative took place the following day. The atmosphere was dramatically different from her original negotiations, more collaborative, more focused on practical implementation rather than theoretical possibilities. "Ambassador," Fleet Marshal Gorthek began, "the Caliph hegemony is prepared to commence Phase 1 operations immediately. Our first priority is establishing joint survey protocols for the Omega Nebula missions." Elena activated her holographic projector, displaying the survey data she had brought from human space. "Fleet Marshal, I have complete survey information for the 15 systems we discussed, plus preliminary data for 8 additional worlds that human scouts have identified since our original negotiations." Admiral Kexmore's optical sensors focused on the display with obvious interest. "These additional systems, what is their development potential?" 3 worlds suitable for immediate colonization, 2 that would require terraforming but have exceptional mineral resources, and 3 that appear to have indigenous life forms that could be scientifically valuable. War Chief Zaltes leaned forward. "Indigenous life, sentient?" Elena shook her head. Non-sentient as far as our surveys can determine, but complex enough to be biologically interesting. One world appears to have developed silicon-based life forms, which could provide insights into alternative biochemistry. Valuable for both scientific research and potential industrial applications, Admiral Kexmore observed. Elena nodded. The joint survey missions would allow us to conduct comprehensive analysis while establishing protocols for future cooperation. The discussion that followed was detailed and technical, focusing on practical questions of logistics, personnel, and resource allocation. Elena found herself impressed by the Calitha's methodical approach to planning. They left nothing to chance, considering every possible complication or opportunity. By the end of the meeting, they had established specific timelines for the first 3 joint missions, assigned personnel from both species to integrated survey teams, and created communication protocols that would allow real-time coordination between human and Calith operations. As Elena walked back to the embassy that evening, she reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed. Just months ago, human and Calith ships had been shooting at each other in contested space. Now they were planning joint missions to explore uncharted worlds together. But she also recognized that the real test was just beginning. Planning cooperative missions was one thing, actually executing them successfully would be something else entirely. The next few months would determine whether humans and Calith could work together in practice, or whether their cultural differences would prove too great to overcome. Elena activated her personal communicator, sending a priority message to UEA headquarters. Phase 1 implementation proceeding on schedule. First joint missions approved by Calith War Council. Recommend immediate deployment of embassy staff and survey specialists. The alliance is moving from theory to reality. As she sent the message, Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were attempting. If the human Calith alliance succeeded, it could serve as a model for cooperation between other species. If it failed, the consequences would be catastrophic not just for humanity, but for the entire concept of interspecies cooperation in this region of space. Standing at her embassy window, looking out at the alien cityscape of Calith Prime under its 3 purple suns, Elena Vasquez prepared for the most challenging phase of her diplomatic career. The negotiations had been difficult, but implementation would be the real test of whether 2 radically different species could actually build something together instead of destroying each other. 6 months later, the human transport ship New Geneva limped into Earth's orbital space with its emergency beacon screaming distress across every frequency. The vessel that had departed for Calith Prime carrying supplies and personnel for the flourishing human embassy now returned as a tomb, its hull scarred by weapons fire and its cargo holds filled with the debris of broken dreams. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the rescue vessels attached to the damaged transport. Her weathered face showed no emotion as the reports filtered in, but those who knew her could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the railing just a little too tightly. "Survivors?" she asked quietly. Commander Walsh, the rescue operation coordinator, shook his head grimly. 17 crew members, all in critical condition. No passengers. And, Admiral. Ambassador Vasquez is among the survivors, but... She's not responding to medical treatment. The doctors say her injuries are extensive, but that's not the worst of it. She won't speak, won't acknowledge anyone's presence. It's like she's not there anymore. Admiral Torres closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the implications. Elena Vasquez had been the architect of the Human Calith Alliance, the woman who had convinced the most dangerous predators in known space to work with humanity instead of devouring it. If something had happened to her, if the alliance had collapsed. "Get me a priority channel to President Martinez," she ordered. "And prepare the emergency council chamber. We're going to need answers, and we're going to need them fast." The full story emerged over the following hours, pieced together from ship logs, medical reports, and the fragmented testimonies of the few crew members who were coherent enough to speak. What they revealed was worse than anyone had dared imagine. The New Geneva had arrived at Calith Prime on schedule, carrying the monthly supply run and a new rotation of embassy staff. The Calith had greeted them with the usual formal courtesy, and the transfer of personnel and materials had proceeded normally. Ambassador Vasquez had transmitted her regular reports, indicating that Phase 1 implementation was proceeding ahead of schedule and that the first joint survey missions had been remarkably successful. Then, 3 days before the New Geneva was scheduled to depart, everything changed. According to the surviving crew members, Caliph security forces had surrounded the human embassy without warning. Ambassador Vasquez had been summoned to an emergency session of the War Council, supposedly to address urgent matters related to the alliance. She had gone willingly, expecting another routine diplomatic meeting. She had returned 6 hours later as something that barely resembled the woman who had left. She was broken, whispered Lieutenant Chen, one of the surviving embassy staff members. Her words came in halting gasps between medical treatments. Not physically, at least, not just physically. It was like they had reached into her mind and torn something essential away. Dr. Sarah Kim, the embassy's chief medical officer who had somehow survived the evacuation, provided more clinical details during her debriefing. The ambassador showed signs of severe psychological trauma, but also neurological damage consistent with deliberate neural manipulation. The Caliph have technologies we don't fully understand, ways of affecting brain chemistry and neural pathways directly. Admiral Torres found herself struggling to maintain professional composure. Are you saying they tortured her? I'm saying they did something that went beyond physical torture, Dr. Kim replied grimly. They didn't just break her body, they broke her mind, her personality, everything that made her who she was. And they did it with surgical precision. The medical reports confirmed Dr. Kim's assessment. Elena Vasquez showed signs of systematic psychological dismantling, selective memory erasure, emotional suppression, and what the neurologists described as personality fragmentation. She could respond to basic stimuli, could follow simple instructions, but the brilliant diplomat who had negotiated humanity's survival was gone. President Martinez arrived at Earth Defense Headquarters within hours of receiving Admiral Torres's report. She found the admiral standing in the medical bay, watching through an observation window as doctors worked frantically to stabilize the woman who had once saved human civilization. How bad is it? The president asked quietly. Admiral Torres handed her a data pad containing the preliminary medical reports. They didn't just torture her, Madam President. They systematically destroyed her personality, her memories, her capacity for independent thought. And they did it so precisely that she's still technically alive and functional. President Martinez reviewed the reports with growing horror. Why? Why would they do this to her? To send a message, Admiral Torres replied grimly. The surviving crew members report that war diplomat Thexball delivered a formal statement before the New Geneva was allowed to depart. The Caliph hegemony considers the alliance terminated due to human duplicity and weakness. They're giving us 30 days to evacuate all human personnel from Caliph space. Duplicity? What are they talking about? Admiral Torres activated a holographic display showing intelligence reports from the past month. As near as we can determine, the Caliph discovered evidence of human intelligence gathering operations in their territory. Specifically, they found hidden sensors in the embassy and detected unauthorized transmissions to UEA intelligence. President Martinez stared at the display in disbelief. We weren't conducting espionage operations against the Caliph. The alliance protocols specifically prohibited. We weren't conducting official operations, Admiral Torres corrected. But someone was. UEA intelligence has confirmed that a rogue cell within their organization was gathering unauthorized intelligence on Caliph military capabilities, using the embassy as cover. The implications hit President Martinez like a physical blow. A rogue cell destroyed the alliance? A rogue cell gave the Caliph the excuse they needed to destroy the alliance, Admiral Torres clarified. Our analysis suggests that elements within the Caliph War Council never truly supported cooperation with humanity. They were looking for justification to terminate the agreement and return to their preferred policy of conquest. President Martinez moved to the observation window, looking down at the broken woman who had once been their greatest diplomatic asset. And Ambassador Vasquez paid the price for our failure. Admiral Torres nodded grimly. They made sure we would understand the consequences of betraying Caliph trust. What they did to her, it's not just torture. It's a demonstration of power, a warning of what happens to anyone who attempts to deceive the hegemony. The emergency session of the UEA Council convened within hours, with representatives participating via emergency holographic link from across human space. The mood in the chamber was grim as President Martinez presented the catastrophic news. Council members, she began formally, the Caliph hegemony has unilaterally terminated the alliance agreement and expelled all human personnel from their territory. Ambassador Vasquez has been returned to us in a condition that can only be described as a war crime. The uproar that followed was immediate and intense. Council member Harrison from New Geneva was the first to find his voice. Madam President, what are our options for response? We can't allow this aggression to go unanswered. President Martinez gestured toward Admiral Torres, who activated the chamber's main display. Admiral Torres will brief you on our current military situation. Admiral Torres's presentation was methodical and devastating. Council members, our fleet analysis indicates that the Caliph hegemony could conquer human space within 4 months if they commit their full military resources to the effort. We have 47 star systems with significant defensive capabilities, but they control over 400 systems and possess technology that our ships cannot match. What about our allies? Asked Council member Rodriguez from Mars Colony. The meditation worlds, the Melkari, the other species we have treaties with? None of them have military capabilities sufficient to challenge the Caliph, Admiral Torres replied bluntly. The ZXNI are pacifists by religious conviction. The Melkari have strong defensive technology but limited offensive capacity. Our other allies are either too small or too distant to provide meaningful assistance. Councilmember Park from Titan Station spoke next, her voice tight with controlled anger. So we're defenseless against Caliph aggression because our own intelligence services violated the alliance protocols? President Martinez nodded grimly. The rogue cell has been identified and arrested, but the damage is done. The Caliph have classified their actions as evidence of systematic human duplicity, justifying termination of all cooperation agreements. What about the joint survey missions? Asked Councilmember Santos from the outer colonies. Didn't those prove that cooperation was beneficial? Admiral Torres modified the display to show recent intelligence reports. The survey missions were successful from a human perspective, but apparently the Caliph saw them differently. Our analysis suggests they were using the joint operations to assess human capabilities and identify potential vulnerabilities. The horrible truth was beginning to emerge. The Caliph had never intended the alliance to be permanent. They had used the cooperation framework to gather intelligence on human technology, territorial dispositions, and military capabilities. The rogue intelligence operation had simply provided them with a convenient excuse to terminate the agreement and begin conquest operations. Recommendation? President Martinez asked quietly. Admiral Torres's response was stark. Immediate mobilization of all defensive resources. Evacuation of non-essential personnel from border systems. And preparation for a war we cannot win. The silence that followed was profound. 57 human worlds, over 3 billion people, facing extinction at the hands of the most powerful military force in known space. Councilmember Harrison finally spoke his